Hi, and welcome back to the Core Learning channel. Today we're going to be looking at fractions and we're going to be looking at common denominators. So, as you may or may not know, a denominator is simply the bottom of a fraction. Now, when we want to do something like add or subtract or order fractions, we really need to have the same denominator to compare the numerators. So, what we're going to do is find out how we can get the same denominator when we are presented with different fractions. So let's just take these three fractions as an example. So we have 3/5, 6/10, and 5/7. So if I were to say to you, how are we going to order this? Unless you're particularly smart, you might find this quite challenging. I mean, how do we find out which one of these is bigger? It's not immediately obvious. So what we need to do, we identify the denominators, and we need all of these to be the same number. So one way that we can guarantee getting the same bottom number is we can just multiply the denominators together. So in this case, we have a 5, a 10, and a 7. So we can just multiply these together, and that gives us 350. So what we can now do, we can rewrite each of our original fractions as something over 350. So how are we going to do this? So the way this is done is, if we take our first example, we have 3/5. Well, what we can do is multiply top and bottom by 70 here, because we know that 350 divided by 5 is 70. Or another way of putting it is, how do we get from 5 to 350? We multiply it by 70. So we then need to multiply top and bottom by 70. And you can see that this doesn't actually change the fraction, because 70 over 70 is just 1. So it's the same fraction, but we're just moving it up in magnitude. So this gives us 210 over 350. Then we have 6 over 10. So how do we get from 10 to 350? Well, we need to times it by 35. So if we times top and bottom by 35, we get 210 over 350. And lastly, we have the denominator of 7. So to get from 7 to 350, we need to multiply by 50. So if we do top and bottom by 50, we get 250 over 350. So we now have those three original fractions rewritten, but all with the same denominator now. So now we can see that this 5 over 7, when we've rewritten this, it's 250 over 350, whereas the other two are both 210 over 350. What this means is, quite simply, that 5 over 7 is bigger than 6 over 10 or 3 over 5. And in this case, actually, what this also tells you is that 3 over 5 and 6 over 10 are the same. So let's run through some examples. So let's sort the following from smallest to largest. So we have 3/4, 5/8, and 7/10. Now what I've done here is that I've multiplied the denominators together, but the more astute of you amongst our audience may notice that there is actually a smaller common denominator amongst these denominators for these fractions. So 40 is actually the lowest common denominator here. So obviously 4, 8, and 10 all go into 40. But particularly when we're ordering fractions, the denominator doesn't really matter. It just has to be the same. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get to it. So 3/4. So the question we've got to ask here is, how do we get from 4, which is the denominator, to the denominator of 320? Well, we're going to need to multiply by 80. So we need to multiply 3/4 by 80 on the top and the bottom. So if we multiply 3 by 80, that gives us 240, and obviously the denominator is going to be the same in each case. So we have 240 over 320. Do the same thing with the 5/8. In this case, we need to multiply the 8 by 40 to get 320. If we multiply the 5 by 40, this gives us 200. And lastly, we have 7/10. So to get from 10 to 320, we have to multiply by 32. So we need to multiply 7/10 by 32 over 32, and we're going to get, 7 times 32 is 224, so we get 224 over 320. So now we literally just compare the size of the numerators to order them. So 200 over 320 is clearly the smallest, so the 5/8 is the smallest here, then the 224 over 320, this is the 7/10, and the largest is the 240 over 320, which is the 3/4. I won't go in the rest in such granular detail, but we have 5/6, 9/10, and 2/3. So 5/6, if we multiply the denominators together, we get 180. So 5/6 becomes 150 over 180. 9/10 becomes 168 over 180, and 2/3 becomes 120 over 180. And again, simply comparing the size of the numerators, we get that 2/3 is the smallest, then 5/6, then 9/10. And then the last line we did here, we had 2/5, 1/3, and 3/7. This gives us the denominator of the common denominator of 105, and then working this out, we get 2/5 is equal to 42 over 105. 1/3 is equal to 35 over 105, and 3/7 is equal to 45 over 105. Again, by comparing the size of the numerators, we get that 1/3 is the smallest, then it's going to be 2/5, and lastly it's going to be 3/7. So hopefully that all made sense, and now you're ready to have a go at a few questions yourself. So when you're ready, pause the video, have a go at these. All I want you to do here is just rewrite the fractions with a common denominator. So in the case of the first one, I'm expecting the answer to be 2 fractions which have the same denominator. So when you're ready, as I was saying, pause the video, have a go at these questions, and then unpause the video when you're ready to go through the answers. So hopefully you got on with those fine. Let's start from the top. We have 1/4 and we have 3/8. Well, in this case, the lowest common denominator here is actually just 8, because 4 and 8 both go into 8. So to get from 1/4 to something over 8, we have to times top and bottom by 2. So we're going to get 2/8. And then we can obviously just keep the 3/8. Likewise, in the second one, we have 2/3 and 5/6. And in this case, our lowest common denominator will just be 6. So to get from 2/3 to something over 6, we're going to have to multiply top and bottom by 2. And this gives us 4/6 and 5/6 as our answer. Using the same principle, next we have our lowest common denominator of 9. So our answer is going to be 8 over 9 and 3 over 9. Next, we have 4/5 and 6/7. In this case, we can't just use one of these denominators as the lowest common denominator. So we're going to have to multiply the 5 by the 7. This gives us 35. So I think this is going to be our lowest common denominator in this case. So to get from 4/5 to something over 35, we multiply top and bottom by 7. So this is going to give us 28 over 35. And then we have 6 over 7, which we're going to multiply top and bottom by 5. This gives us 30 over 35. On the right hand side now, we have 3 numbers to contemplate with. So here we have a 6, 4/7, and 2/5. So we can multiply these numbers together, and we're going to get a common denominator of, I can't remember, 210. So to get from 6 to 210, we need to multiply it by 35. So we get 35 over 210. Next, 4/7 becomes 120 over 210, and last 2/5 becomes 84 over 210. Next, the last three, I'm just going to read out the answers. So we have 9/10, 1/3, and 2/5. This becomes 27 over 30, 10 over 30, and 12 over 30. We have a 9th, 2/3, and 7 over 18. So the lowest common denominator here is going to be 18. So we then get 2 over 18, 12 over 18, and 7 over 18. And lastly, we have a 5th, 3/10, and 6 over 25. The lowest common denominator here, just looking at it, is going to be 50. So this gives us 10 over 50, 15 over 50, and 12 over 50. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and learnt something today. If anything is unclear or you have any questions, leave a comment and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you at the next one.